you. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Hello from Bellingham, Washington. Hello. It's fantastic. Welcome. I just wanted to start by introducing the guest we're really excited to have today. Today we have Sari Solden. She's a psychotherapist based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where she has been counseling women and men with ADHD for over 30 years. She's the author of the books Women and Attention Deficit Disorder, Journeys Through Adulthood, and she's the co-author on A Radical Guide for Women with ADHD. So thank you, Sari, for coming on today and having this discussion with me.
Oh yeah, it's great, Jennifer. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So I think it would be awesome to just kind of start with learning a little bit about you and, talking a little bit about how you've come to where you are now.
It's been a long journey.
I believe it. That's awesome. So first I thought maybe you could take us through your experience going through school. What was that like for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have ADHD. Of course, I didn't get diagnosed like a lot of women until like 40, but I struggled a lot in school, and I wasn't diagnosed with anything specific, like a specific learning disability, but I can look back now and understand the executive function issues were impacting my ability to do well in to feel well in school. I did well in school, but it was a struggle, and I had a lot of difficulties, like a lot of women and girls, with the overcompensation, the trying to please everybody, not understanding what my experience was. So I had specific problems that might have been specific learning disabilities, like in math and in handwriting. So I was more like a twice exceptional, which I don't know if you as Learning Disability Association knows about, but this is what a lot of smart girls and women experience, where they, on one hand, are really smart, but they have this other wide discrepancy that doesn't make any sense, and there's a whole different experience. So you have great challenges and great strengths, and there's a wide gap between that. And so even when I finally got tested, I saw that I had a huge 90 percentile difference between my verbal abilities and my performance abilities. So later I understood what was going on. But in school, I was like, I remember in the 4th grade when I had to start doing book reports, I started compensating really early. I could as soon as I had to do outlines and linear reports, I started turning everything into plays and productions. And I was just using my creativity even back then without knowing why. I did like This Is Your Life, Jane Eyre. I turned everything into quiz shows or dramas, and I was able, because I couldn't do it the traditional way. And luckily I was able to use those skills in those ways. Living with people in college was very traumatic. I always had meetings about me in the dorm or with roommates. When I started living independently, my ability to organize and keep things orderly became a huge issue when I was having to live with other people. It was just very traumatic. I would do well in my subjects, but I would get big red marks, even all through school. This is a mess, see me, like in the 7th grade. And so it was hard to keep up my self-image without knowing and no explanation for really what was going on. So, I had those struggles without understanding why. And that's really what happens to a lot of women and girls, where they don't have an explanation for their difficulties.
No, absolutely. I'm sure there's so many people with that kind of shared experience, specifically talking about women and girls. So if you could think back to when you were really young, like between 5 and 7, let's say, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, it's funny, my environment, I was thinking back when I was 5, is just like it is right now. I had this desk, looking out at that time over a rose garden. I'm looking over trees right now. And I was at a desk exploring and dreaming and writing. And I actually was writing a story about a little girl who was afraid of dogs, like I was then, and who went to a psychiatrist who helped her. So I was already interested in kind of therapy and expression, which are the themes throughout my life, helping people and being expressive and creative. I also really wanted to be a Broadway star, actually, though, and I was cast in a lot, in my first role until they heard me sing and I couldn't carry a tune, and that was traumatic. But I did develop a lot of programs over the years with music and movement to help people with their feelings. So a lot of the threads were always there, actually, now that I look back. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Excellent. I was just saying that it's really cool that you were able to weave that into what you're doing today. And that's, I think, what everyone hopes to be able to do, So when did you know that you wanted to be a therapist?
Well, like I said, I guess I never really dreamed of exactly where I would get to today. It was more like I think I constantly was following this desire to express and to help people. So a combination of like humanism and valuing diversity and expression, that was always there. And so went on many different kind of jagged paths more than following like a specific goal. But I think it was like when I wrote that first book in 1995, then everything sort of came together because that was very healing. I was overcame those feelings like a lot of women have of underachievement and invisibility. And that book really spoke to women and professionals and people all over the world because it was very early on. And I didn't know that I was being brave by saying these things because I didn't really come from that field. I came from minority mental health, more cross cultural counseling. So I said what I saw in women. And it was really, and it was at the beginning of the internet. So women all over the world started talking to each other and defining their own experiences. So that's when my career really took off. And I really it was such a healing experience to hear from people from all over the world and to help people and to travel all over the world to talk to people. So that's really what's propelled me for the last 30 years, that first book.
All right. Well, I'm curious how, for people that would be interested in getting into maybe therapy or counseling today, do you have any advice for folks that were looking to do that?
Well, yeah, my career path was very long and twisted, and it went from, when I if I could talk about that for a minute, and then
Oh,
lead into
please,
that
like,
because I want
take
to
us
touch it
everywhere.
to the neurodiverse women out there, really, because designing a path for yourself when you're neurodiverse is different than when you're neurotypical. And so I did follow a lot of different twisted paths. And I went home in those days. I graduated from a great university. I went home and I tried to be a housewife. And I always said that ADHD saved me from the life of superficiality and artificiality and conformity that I actually wanted. I couldn't do it. So I kept looking and kept moving. And I had a lot of interesting jobs early on. And, I worked in inner city, daycares. I worked in farm labor camps. Then I started devising my own programs with movement and music to help people with creative expression. And let me see where I'm at. And then eventually I did go back and picked up that desire I had, as I said, when I was 5 about helping people. I went back to school and became a therapist. But even then I changed course. I was in clinical psychology. Then I realized what I really wanted was counseling psychology and minority mental health. Long and short of it is I wound up just by happenstance at this amazing agency, Full Circle. It was the only program in the country that had a program for adults with learning disabilities because we didn't talk about ADHD back then. And but it was in a counseling agency. So it was all about not academic. It was about the effect on your sense of self and your relationships when you have learning disabilities. It was an amazing program. And I was surrounded by books I was searching in between clients about what does it mean to be so disorganized when I was I had a degree and I had a master's degree and was successful. I still was so feeling so demoralized, really, and distressed that I didn't know how I was ever going to figure out what was going on with me. And so it was just good timing that I was there in the very early 90s when these first books came out. I remember the first book I read was by Kate Kelly and Peggy Ramundo. It was You Mean I'm Not Crazy, Stupid, or Lazy? Something like that. And that really, set light bulbs off. And I traveled across country to Ann Arbor. I was in California at the time, met all the beginning, pioneers in the field. And that started a wonderful, that golden age of adult ADHD, where we were all like learning and helping each other, and all on this together. I remember when I went to my first conference, and the first time ever, in 93, where adults were not hiding anymore, not trying to pass for normal. And I talk about in my book how women are just going, leafing through all their, junk in their purses, and, scribbling on their arms, and they laughing and interrupting. And it was like the first time that I saw like there was this whole other tribe of people out there. So eventually I was working in this agency, and to work there, I had to get tested. Like I had learning disability tests. And it was the first time I ever had any sign that I had this extreme problem with memory. It turned out that they discovered some real problems that I had been compensating for. Then I started working with women and men. At the time, we were starting to understand that women, that people could have this thing they were discovering in adults, ADHD, even if they never had hyperactivity. Called it ADD without hyperactivity at that time. So I started tracking the difference between women and men, and the sense of shame that women had about their organizational problems. Even when men had the same problems, it was quite a different personal identity issue for women, and the stigma that held. So I started writing about it. But then finally, I got diagnosed and got on medication myself. And then I started talking. I mean, I didn't talk in groups at all at this agency anywhere. Then I started talking, and I started putting thoughts together, and I started doing little speeches here, little talks here and there, first at the agency and then at these conferences. And I just started meeting people, and I just started letting people know what I thought. Still, the agency was really hard for me, because it was, people were sitting in the lunchroom writing notes and talking and all this. Couldn't deal with it, and transitioning from one room to another and blocking out the noise and writing all these expectations. So I eventually went into private practice. And then I met this pioneer in the field at the time, Edna Copeland, who told me about writing a book, because we didn't have like cut and paste on the computers then, pretty much. And I had to cut and paste hundreds of ideas about all these ideas I've been tracking, and put them in paper bags. And I got a lot of help, and eventually wrote that book that helped change everything. And so my advice for people trying to get into the field or trying to make an impact, if you're neurodiverse, whether it's to be a therapist or a writer, is to, I guess, first develop some kind of niche. Don't be too broad. Try to be identified with something that you really care about. Find something that you really want to show people about your thought process. So, write something little, say something little. There's a lot of opportunities now, but you have to show people who you are. And the profession, I do a lot of professional mentoring now. And over these years, to build a career, not just have a job, you have to build alliances, and you have to, find like-minded people to support you, and protect your reputation, be grateful, be loyal, be generous. There's a lot of things that go into building a long-term career. So, I guess it's a combination of perseverance and being brave, and recognizing the right time, and just letting people know who you are and getting help.
Yeah, absolutely. I also really kind of resonated with what you're saying too, about the various paths you took to get where you are now. And that I think that a lot of people have that experience where they maybe need to try a bunch of different things before they figure out exactly where they're supposed to go or what they're supposed to be. And that's an okay thing, and that's a good thing. And you don't necessarily have to be at a job for 40 years for it to be good or worthwhile.
Definitely not these days, especially. I'm still trying to figure out the next step, because the pandemic changed my whole way of operating again. And now I'm at home working on Zoom, and I have a lot of new opportunities for helping, people in different ways. So yeah, you have to keep recognizing those opportunities and keep going.
So, what is the best advice that you've ever been given?
Yeah, I really like this question. I think that one of the best pieces was advice was a therapist I had way back then, at that period of time that I was talking about, I think before I was diagnosed. And I would go to these conferences, and I coveted those speaker badges. I saw they were learning disability conferences back then, and people were speaking, and I knew I had all these ideas, but I had no idea how to get my ideas out into the world. I was sure, I had no idea how to get out into the world. And so I would come back from these conferences like sort of depressed. And I remember she said, instead of getting depressed about it, let that pain and those pangs guide you, be guides to what you want. And I think that was the best advice. Instead of letting it keep you down, like recognize like, oh, that's important to me. That's important to me. I want to go there. I want to do that. I want to be like that, do that kind of thing. And so that was great advice. Instead of letting it, get you down, letting it guide you when you recognize like, oh, that means something when I'm getting a pang like that or pain like that. And my father, who was an artist, like for instance, there's this painting back there, he always was teaching me to think big, to do things differently, to have adventures, to not lead a regular life. So that was a good message that I got right from the beginning, you know. Um, as well as my publisher back then in Marin County, who said, and I recognized like way back in '94, like, do it now. You have to write this book right now. He said, do it now. So sometimes right timing is important.
Yeah.
At that time, I would see like the couple books that were being written now earlier on, or articles about ADHD in adults. It would say, and women have it too, but it's different. And so I could see that thread was all the way through that. And I was working with women. So that was good advice to do it now.
Absolutely. It was the right time. Also, I'll just say quickly too, we're already getting some awesome questions in, and we'll address all questions for Sari in a little bit. We'll open up the chat to questions for anyone that has them for you, and there's already some coming in, so it's awesome. So another thing I wanted to ask you was, how would you describe the way you found the power to achieve?
Is that one of your mottos at the Learning Disability Association?
Absolutely is.
Well, it's
Yeah.
funny. I mean, my power to achieve was because so many things were blocked for me. Actually, it's sort of ironic. So everything I wanted wasn't opening easily. I had to keep trying new ways. Like you said, I tried this wasn't open to me. This didn't really take. So I tried to take the kernel of what was important to me, my values of humanism or expressing or helping people or diversity, take the core of that and transfer it to a new way, try different things until I found some doors that opened more easily. I sort of think of it as wormholes. I think that's a fantasy term, or it's not, it's a pseudo-scientific thing, but I think of it as a wormhole. I find a little hole in the universe, a little secret kind of tunnel. And I say, okay, how's this connected to that? And I just try to go, that's an ADD superpower, just go from this connection to that connection until I find, and I tried to follow my own voice, because especially for you women with ADHD out there, I think what is a power to achieve is when you, and I did this at some point, you stop trying to wait for all the disorganization to go away, and you start to walk alongside of your difficulties instead of waiting to get over them. And instead of them engulfing you, you have to get to a place of acceptance. Like, that's a chronic difficulty, but that's not who I am, and that doesn't define my life. And you have to find a way to live with the discomfort of what ADHD brings you, and not wait to, or not measure yourself by getting over that difficulty. So learning to live a little bit with